Want to finish, Mark, with our mid-season awards that we want to hand out. And, of course, remind everyone to download, rate, and subscribe to the 415ers podcasts each and every week, 3 times on the Odyssey Sports Podcast Network. I'm on social media at eGettings10. Mark is on social at Mark Grandy, Mark with a C, Grandy with an I. I want to go through a couple of different ones, a couple of different awards that we're going to hand out. MVPs, Offensive Player of the Year, Defensive Player of the Year, Rookie of the Year, and then I have a couple of hopefully tricky questions, Mark, that should divide some folks. But I want to start first with the most valuable player on the 49ers. To me, it's kind of straightforward, but I'm curious what your supporting argument would be for said player.
Straightforward, you say? I mean,
I think it is.
I'm interested in what your pick is because I think you could go a few different directions. You can make the case that the 49ers offense is such a group effort. There's so much talent there that
If you say
it
it's
kind of
Kyle Shanahan, I swear to God.
I'm
No,
not. I'm
no.
not saying Kyle Shanahan. I think it might. I think the way the Niners offense is set up, it kind of encourages you to maybe look to the defensive side of the ball for the most valuable player because there's so many individual players on offense. And I know this is the way that football works, but I think specifically for the 49ers with all the talent they have there, I mean the quarterback position is kind of the de facto MVP. I'm going to steer clear of that. For that reason, I also not sure that Jimmy Garoppolo is worthy of the MVP of this team, despite the fact that he is playing good football. I'm gonna go to the defensive side of the ball, and I'm gonna select the mainstay. He's played in all 8 games. He's been in the middle of everything, and that's Fred Warner for me, leading the team in tackles. He has a sack. He got one last week on Matthew Stafford of the Rams. He's deflected a number of passes this season. For Fred Warner, you got to look past the stats. I mein, he's always there. He's in the middle of everything. He's flying to the ball. He can cover some speedy receivers. He was matched up against Cooper Kupp a few times, in the Niners' last game that win against the Rams. He can rush the passer. He can stop the run. He's done a bit of everything for the 49ers. And after a bit of a down year last year, Evan, I think he's been phenomenal. So Fred Warner is my team MVP.
Okay, so maybe it's not as straightforward as I thought. To me, it's pretty clear cut. It's Nick Bosa. I know that he has missed one game so far this year, but if we're talking about value, if we're talking about what a player brings on a play-by-play basis, and he's been on the field enough for me to confidently say, I know he didn't play against Atlanta. That was a game where they missed him, but Nick Bosa is to me the best player on this team. He is the most valuable player on this team. He's tied for first in the league with 8.5 sacks. He's number one in quarterback hits. He's also top 5 quietly in tackles for loss. So he's played the run about as well as he's played the pass this season, which of course he is in a different atmosphere than many other edge defenders. And he's done it all, Mark, in 312 total snaps, which would be 45th among edge defenders. So players at his position, I know he's had one less game than a few of them, but even a guy like Zadarius Smith for the Minnesota Vikings technically plays outside linebacker, but he's also played 7 games. He also has 8.5 sacks. Nick Bosa has done it in fewer snaps on the field and yet has been just as valuable to this defense. I just feel like when he is on the field, they are a completely different football team. And I know I've said it before, but to me, as much as Kyle Shanahan having a quarterback healthy has aided the 49ers in making deep postseason runs, the presence of Nick Bosa in both 2019 as well as last season compared to 2020 is the reason why the 49ers have competed potentially for Super Bowls. He is that generational talent that right now, to me, leads everyone with how he comports himself on the field. He's not really a rah-rah guy, although apparently in pregame speeches he has kind of come out of his turtle shell. Still hasn't done it with the media as much, but maybe he'll get to that in future years. But to me, Nick Bosa is, I think, clearly cut the most valuable player on this team.
That's fair, and he's also so great that he managed a half a sack on the bye week. I don't know if you saw that, but the NFL changed the ruling on that Fred Warner sack of Matthew Stafford in the second half, and they actually took half a sack away from Fred Warner and gave it to Nick Bosa. So they each got a half a sack for that one. So Nick Bosa is so good that he gets half a sack without even playing a game.
I also do think that because I think there's also a little bit of, I don't want to say statistician help, but with the amount of holding calls that do not
Hmm.
go Nick Bosa's way, I think they're starting to even things out as far as giving him some numbers that could be a little more evenly distributed around the team. So I haven't heard much about the holding calls this year, but I know that's been a big theme of him in recent years. Okay, let's go to, but before we get to the DPOY, because to me it's got to be different than Warner or Bosa in this case. But the offensive player of the year, Mark, I'm this to me is where things get a little bit muddled because the offense has had so many different stars in so many different games that it's kind of hard to choose. Um, but I'm curious what you think about the 49ers offensive player of the year midway through the season.
Yeah, I spent a lot of time thinking about this one. I think you can make the case for a player, a wide receiver, a running back, a quarterback, and then you could also maybe make an argument for a couple of offensive linemen. I think I'm ultimately going to fall back onto the quarterback. Maybe that's a bit of a surprise coming from me, but I'm going to pick Jimmy Garoppolo as the team's offensive player of the year. I think
I'm proud
considering
of you.
considering how the season has gone, it was bumpy at first. That game against the Broncos stands out, where it was probably the worst game in Jimmy Garoppolo's career. But just the steadying force that he has been for the 49ers. I mean, you lose your starting quarterback for the whole season, and yet you're looking at a 4-4 record into the bye, and ultimately everyone is feeling really good about your team and your team's chances to win the division, to potentially get a second or third seed, a second or third seed in the NFC, and maybe make a playoff run. So I think a lot of the credit there goes to Jimmy Garoppolo, kind of his steady leadership. And of course, he's playing good football on the field. I mean, 11 touchdowns, 4 interceptions. He's throwing for over 240 yards per game to this point in the season, which is a pretty big number. And you look at some of the advanced numbers for the 49ers offense, actually a top 10 passing offense and, bottom third in terms of rushing. So Jimmy Garoppolo has done a good job considering the expectations, considering everything that happened to their starting quarterback. I think for that reason, he's my offensive player of the year through the midway point.
Well, I'm glad we have a chance to give Jimmy G some credit, Mark. I know it's been a bit seldom throughout this podcast this year, but I'm proud of you for making that your choice. Whereas I have been more of a Jimmy G defender than most, I am actually going to maybe throw a curveball at you. My
Okay.
offensive player of the year is Brandon Ayuk.
I like it.
He is the leader on this team as far as wide receivers concerned, receptions, yards, touchdowns. He has been the most consistent receiver over the course of this season. By the end of this year, that will certainly change. But looking at even just the last 3 weeks, I know two of them have been losses, but more than 80 yards. He's gotten 6 or more receptions, and he's starting to get more targets too, which tells me, ironically, when Debo was in the game, he had more targets than he did when Debo was out against the Rams. But Brandon Ayuk is a player to me that's found his role, which is maybe most important on an offense where you have a lot of options to choose from. Of course, Ayuk now with Debo, Kittle, and of course Christian McCaffrey being involved. Brandon Ayuk has been a mainstay in this offense throughout the season. And just looking at sort of number 2 receivers in the league, right now, he's about 8.8 yards per target. That would be better than some other number 2s, Mike Williams, Devontae Smith, Tyler Lockett. He has been a more efficient route runner than any of those 3 number 2 receivers on quality teams. The other thing that I didn't really know until I started digging through some numbers here was Ayuk's also been situationally a dependable target,
Mm.
specifically on third down. His ability to get open on routes deep and in the middle part of the field have been kind of suppressed, I think. But he is a top 10 receiver in situations in which first down receptions on 3rd and 7 or longer. So when the 49ers are behind the sticks, when they don't run the ball well early in downs and have needed to be bailed out on 3rd and longs, Brandon Ayuk has been their go-to guy. And that to me is very valuable, and why, along with the rest of his body of work, having led this receiving core in just about every category, he would be my pick for Offensive Player of the Year.
Yep, I was considering him as well. I think the other main consideration for me was Jeff Wilson Jr., despite the fact that he's
Yeah.
no longer a 49er. Kind of talked about the steadying impact of Jimmy Garoppolo. I think Jeff Wilson Jr. the same way in the running game. And then I don't think you can have this conversation without mentioning Trent Williams, despite the fact that he's been injured, which probably takes him out of the running, but you can still see the difference that he makes when he's on versus off the field. So I think I like the Ayuk pick. Certainly been his best first half of a season in his career, and I'm excited to see what he does for the rest of the season.
Yeah, me as well. I also do want to shout out George Kittle, who, when he's been on the field, has played the most snaps of, I think, any skill player on the 49ers, whether it be blocking or route running. So he's been certainly valuable once coming back from that injury at the beginning of this. Defensive player of the year, Mark. Who you got? I know you picked Warner as your MVP. So who does that leave?
So I is the rule I can't pick Warner for defensive player of the year.
Oh, I mean, if you'd like to, Dick, please explain.
I'll go away from Fred Warner since I chose him as MVP. I think his leadership puts him over the top, but I'll choose your MVP as my defensive player of the year. That's Nick Bosa. I mean, you already made the argument for him. He's been phenomenal. 8.5 sacks. Up there with the league leaders in pressures and hurries and quarterback hits and sacks. Nick Bosa is my guy for defensive player of the year. And no there's a reason why the 49ers kind of got manhandled on the defensive line by the Atlanta Falcons. It's because Nick Bosa wasn't out there. And that was a big reason why they were able to, one, run all over the 49ers on the ground, and Marcus Mariota was kept relatively clean. It's because Nick Bosa wasn't there. So defensive player of the year, Nick Bosa.
Right on. I am going to go with Talanoa Hufanga as my defensive player of the year so far for the 49ers. I know that means I do not include Fred Warner in any of that, which
How dare you?
is somewhat disrespectful. But to me, Talanoa Hufanga has been the most versatile defender for the 49ers this season. And really, in his second year, has burst onto the scene as a guy who I hope is going to be a part of the 49ers on that side of the ball for a long time. He is their leader in interceptions with 3, and so far is number 1, in my opinion, for moment of the season with his pick 6 on Monday night in week 4 against the Los Angeles Rams. Even looking back, having done revisionist history, seeing what the Rams have become, to me, that was and still is the moment of the season so far for the 49ers. He is one of 2 players in the NFL with at least 3 interceptions, 1 sack, and 6 passes defended, because they put him all over the field. He has taken snaps, of course, at the free safety or the safety position, but he's also played in the slot. They've put him at corner, and they've also blitzed with him, where you've seen Hufanga at the defensive line spot a few times throughout this year. So Hufanga has played just about everywhere there is to play on the defense, and some of that is because he roams, but a lot of it is because D'Amico Ryans and that 49ers crew can use him in so many different spots, and he can still be impactful despite maybe not playing in his primary position every single snap. He's taken the 3rd most snaps on the team. Fred Warner would be above him, along with Tayshaun Gibson, which I think is kind of interesting. But through the first 5 weeks of the year, Hufanga did not miss a single snap. So he has been on the field just about as much as any player on defense. He has played in more positions than any player on defense, and he's been more impactful as far as the statistics are concerned. And just by the eye test, to me, Mark, that's why I would go with the Tongan Tiger as my defensive player of the year so far.
Good pick. I like it. I know we're running out of time, so why don't we just get on to rookie of the year? I think this one is a relatively easy one, just considering, what rookies have played and haven't played too much for the 49ers so far this year. So I'll just get it off the board quickly. Spencer Burford, right guard for the 49ers, rookie out of University of Texas, San Antonio, 4th-round pick for the 49ers. He is my rookie of the year because he's played the whole season and he hasn't been terrible. I mean, that's kind of, what the consideration is when you're talking about offensive or just rookie of the years in general. Drake Jackson obviously has played a bunch as well, but I'm going Spencer Burford, kind of doing a good job in steadying that offensive line.
Yeah, I would actually go with Drake Jackson. I thought that was going to be the clear cut option, just because of how many injuries the defensive line has sustained. and how much he's had to play. I know he was more touted than Burford as a second round pick and the first selection last year's draft by the Niners. But with 3 sacks to his name thus far, I think he's put together a pretty solid rookie campaign. Along the lines of Burford, I got a couple of quick hitters before we get out of here, Mark. Better first year offensive lineman, Aaron Banks or Spencer Burford?
So Aaron Banks drafted last year in the second round for the 49ers, first year as a starter, as you mentioned. Burford most recently drafted. I'm going to go Aaron Banks. He's playing the left guard spot, and I think the reason why is because he's had to play, or he's had Trent Williams with him for the first few weeks of the season, and then Trent Williams was out and missed a handful of time. And while you could certainly see the offensive line struggle a bit, I thought that Aaron Banks did a relatively good job, keeping that offensive line afloat. And obviously there was help, from other people as well. But without Trent Williams, without that big stalwart to your left, I still think that Aaron Banks has done a good job. So while Burford, I think, has exceeded expectations as a fourth round pick, I think most Niner fans and Niners in general have been pleased with what they've seen from Aaron Banks, especially after he was kind of much maligned through his rookie year because he didn't play at all.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think Banks has stepped up in his first season, although Burford quietly has been kind of a rock. Pardon me, kind of a rock on that right side. So I would go with Banks too. Next question: bigger acquisition, Charvarius Ward or Christian McCaffrey?
It's a tough one. Charvarius Ward has been phenomenal. He kind of got burned against the Chiefs, his old team. Unfortunate for him. But I'm going to go with Christian McCaffrey. I think just what he adds to the offense. Oh, now that I think about it, I don't know. They don't have a ton of depth in the defensive secondary. I'll stay
Mm.
McCaffrey. I think what he does on offense and the way that he can affect the game in multiple ways on the ground, through the air, and I think his perfect fit with quarterback Jimmy Garoppolo is what pushes him over the top for me. So I'll go McCaffrey.
I would go with Charvarius Ward. I mean, he's played more games, but I just think that was a signing over this offseason that wasn't really talked about a whole lot. I know it was in this part of the country, but Charvarius Ward has been one of the better corners in football, even though the last few weeks haven't been necessarily ideal for him. I just feel like with the identity of this team being on defense, he takes it to a whole nother level, even one different than a couple of years ago in 2019. We've talked about the difference at the corner position. Charvarius Ward, to me, is their best man-to-man guy that they have had in quite some time, even though Christian McCaffrey, by the end of the season, will probably be looked at as the bigger acquisition. Should he be able to stay on the field and stay healthy? Last question. This one's a little bit tough, though. The most impactful injury of the first half sustained by the 49ers.
There's a lot to choose from. You got to kind of rack your brain and make
Yeah.
note of all the injuries the Niners have suffered. I think Trent Williams is certainly up there, considering that he missed a decent amount of time. I will say though, because he has come back and he hasn't missed nearly as much time, I'm going to go to the defensive side of the ball and say Eric Armstead. I know we've talked a little bit. I think it was last week or maybe it was 2 weeks ago how important he is to stopping the run. And the Niners have actually struggled to limit the run games of opposing teams so far this year. Once he gets back, I think we'll see that Niners defense take another step forward because opponents won't be able to run the ball as much against them. So I'm going to say most impactful injury, I guess, in a negative way by having him out, it's Armstead for me.
In that case, I'll zig where you zag. I think it is still on the defensive side of the ball, but I think it's Emmanuel Mosley,
Hmm.
surprisingly enough, just because of the impact of that injury. With him tearing his ACL against Carolina, he'll be out for the rest of the year. It forces more of a shuffle at a position in which the 49ers do not have as much depth at corner. And I don't think it's surprising that the weeks after against Atlanta as well as Kansas City, the corner position did not fare as well. Some of that could be due to, of course, the other injuries sustained around the defensive side of the ball on that defensive line. Like you mentioned, Eric Armstead takes them to a different level, especially against the run, as you've laid out throughout our episodes this year. But to me, because of the trickle down effect, more so than his actual play, the more impactful injury to me would be Emmanuel Mosley forcing Lenore to the outside, Ambry Thomas maybe, and along with Womack having to play that slot spot, and now Jimmy Ward at the nickel position. They've just had to shuffle around so much because of his absence.
Yep, they have. And when Jason Verrett comes back, which could potentially be this week, I think it'll likely slot Lenore back to the corner, the nickel corner spot, and then I think it'll also see Ward move back to his best safety spot. So interesting to keep an eye on there. But I agree with you that Mosley injury certainly has had a big impact.
All right, and that'll do it for this episode of the 415ers. We'll come at you next on Wednesday morning. Appreciate you tuning in as always. Download, rate, and subscribe to the 415ers. 5 stars are appreciated wherever you download your podcast from, as we'll be coming to you in a couple of days. Mark, I thank you as always for hanging around for a little bit extra this time.
Yeah, it was fun, Evan. Talk to you later.
All right, take it easy, everyone. We'll be back on Wednesday.